Thanks, Marcus. Good afternoon, everyone. Firstly, I really want to thank FreightWaves for having us here and letting me pinch hit at the last moment. Many of you probably saw that our CEO, Trevor Milton, was supposed to be here presenting, but unfortunately couldn't at the last second. For anybody who's seen him speak, I'm a poor substitute, but we'll try and keep you engaged nonetheless. So I want to, if you will indulge me, take a little bit of a walk down memory lane for myself. When people ask me where I'm from originally, my answer is usually it's complicated. And it's not complicated because I was in a witness protection program or anything, but by the time I was 7 years old, I'd actually lived in 6 countries and one of them twice. The next question generally is, were you a military brat? To which my parents would answer, no, she was just a brat. But that's the story for another time, maybe a couch somewhere, I don't know. But no, I was actually an oil brat. And up until I was about 7, this was my idea, my vision of what oil production looked like. A big thing in the middle of the water, a pipe going down, oil coming back up. Then when I was 7, we moved to Calgary, Canada, and my view of oil expanded slightly. I came to know these. They were dotted all over the landscape. Again, oil, pipe goes down, oil comes back up. And I don't know that you would necessarily call these beautiful, right, but probably benign in their own way. But my viewpoint as I moved to Calgary about oil changed in a different way as well. I started to see that it was the economic driver of the city. My dad worked in oil, all of my friends' parents worked in oil. It was funny when I was listening to people talking about Sears and where it is now. As I look back on kind of the opportunities as I was growing up, for some reason, the Sears catalog comes to mind. I don't know how many of you just couldn't wait till that catalog showed up, right, to be able to order from it. Not that I got to, go to university and get a degree or different vacations, but for some reason, that Sears catalog sticks in my head. And then about 15 years ago, my life and the trajectory of my career changed. I got a job with a company, and we provided remote support services to a lot of resource and military-based operations, generally in very remote areas, very austere, harsh environments. And I was assigned a project to design and build a workforce hotel here in the oil sands up in northern Alberta. Now, for any of you that don't know a lot about the oil sands, and I know there are some companies here that have been pressured about getting fuel from the oil sands, let me just tell you a little bit about how it works. So oil sands, very aptly named, the oil is mixed with sand. And there are 2 ways that they can get the oil out of the sand. One is what you're seeing here. It's basically mined, it's strip mined, where you have lots of large shovels, lots of large dump trucks. You basically shovel it up, put it in the truck, and it gets refined from there. There's also what they call SAGD, that's when the oil sands are deeper, and they need to send 2 pipes down. One has hot steam that will steam the oil out of the sand and brings it back up. Both are very energy intensive, both are very water intensive. You can't really see them too well on this picture, but as a byproduct, you have what are called tailings ponds. And I laugh because they're called ponds, but they're really very large. They're almost like lakes, and they're the byproduct of all of this production. So it's water filled with lots of chemicals. As someone who's an avid hiker, nature enthusiast, I was crushed. Literally when we drove up, I wanted to get out of my car and kick the tires. And this isn't to vilify the oil companies. Not at all. And in fact, if you go up to the oil sands today, you'll find that they have some of the most progressive, both environmental and social programs that you'll find anywhere in the world. It was more something in myself. I started to realize that I had been eating at the energy buffet for years, right? Not really thinking about this. And what I needed to do was to get back to that French restaurant. And I'm sure you guys all know, the ones that leave you a little bit hangry, but are probably everything that you need. And so I really started to change what I wanted to do in my career. So I came to, let me just see if I can get these here. So about 10 years ago, I got a job at Walmart as Senior Director of Sustainability for the supply chain, we had committed to doubling the efficiency of our fleet in 10 years. When I got there, we didn't know what that meant. We didn't know how we were going to measure it, but we were able to achieve it in about 10 years, both proving that sustainability could make business sense. We saved the company about $1 billion a year in those efforts, and as well really kind of showed how fuel efficiency is not just about the fuel in the trucks, and I'll talk about that in a second. Like in any good company, we got about 30 seconds to celebrate that, and we started looking at what would the next goals be. And that was right about the same time climate scientists were telling us that, we weren't going fast enough. We weren't digging hard enough to get to our goals. So until then, most of us were focused on emissions growth and just decoupling that from business growth. So if business is going to grow 20%, emissions could only grow 10%. Now we had science-based targets. Now many of you might be hearing about science-based targets from some of your customers. Already about 500 of the largest corporations around the world have committed to science-based targets. So what does that mean? Basically means we need to get to below zero. So not only do we have to decouple the emissions, we have to reduce the intensity of the emissions, we have to get those below zero and actually reverse those emissions. So in Walmart's case, that absolute target is 18% below the baseline. Very aggressive goal. On top of that, we're all hearing about criteria pollutants. I'm sure most people here know about NOx and particulate matter. All of those things that cause human health impacts, that cause the smog and pollution that you're seeing on this picture here. Land use change. So what happens when we take down a forest in order to plant a crop that's going to be used for biofuels? All of a sudden, we've lost all of those trees that would take in the carbon dioxide to help with climate change. Biodiversity. Again, we're losing some of what's happening in the ecosystems. And I want to say probably about 10 years ago, I heard a quote that says, every living thing on the planet has a purpose, except for wasps. No one was able to figure out what is the purpose of a wasp, right? Except to be annoying, sting us. If any of you have been, had to go after being swarmed by wasps, you'll know what I mean. And then about 5 years ago, I learned that they're studying a wasp in Brazil to use its venom as a cancer cure. Everything has its purpose. So protecting the ecosystems, water, whether it's water coming into our facilities, using for truck washes, what does that discharge look like? What's the stormwater look like? How are we protecting our streams? How are we protecting our oceans? Waste. That's become a big thing, and it's interesting how the energy, water, and waste nexus are really coming together. But what are we doing with our used tires? What are we doing with our used oil, our batteries? What about the trucks themselves at the end of life? Are we designing in end of life for those vehicles so that they can be recycled? Social impacts. What's happening in our own operations? What's happening in the operations of our suppliers? And if you all aren't overwhelmed already, we're also talking about indirect impacts. So a lot of the companies here that are in transportation and distribution, you're an indirect impact or scope 3 impact for your customers, which is why you're kind of hearing more pressure on you improving your own operation for the shippers that you work for. And then we start talking about employees, business travel. So what can we do about it? There's a few things I want to suggest going forward. We really need to start looking at the system of things, the life cycle of what we're doing. Look upstream and look downstream of your operation. We want to make sure that how our operation operates isn't adversely affecting something upstream and something downstream. Now, you want to make sure that you're not boiling the ocean with this, because you can get carried away very easily. You want to make sure that you understand what your priorities are within that. And I kind of look at the 3 I's. Number 1, where are you impacting? So what are your largest impacts within your supply chain? Number 2, what's important to you? What's important to the organization? Or perhaps that importance is driven by what's being regulated, right? How do you choose those importance? And the last I is where can you influence? Really decide, where can you have an impact? Where can you influence that part of the supply chain? And then narrow that down and start working on those. So for those of you that haven't heard of Nikola yet, we are a truck manufacturer and we're focused on zero-emission trucks. Our first trucks are going to be hydrogen fuel cell. It's basically an electric powertrain that uses hydrogen and fuel cells as a range extender so that we can compete directly with the diesel trucks that many people are using today. And what I liked about Nikola when I looked at moving over there was not only were they thinking about the vehicle and the service and maintenance, which is what you see, today in the traditional model, they were also looking at the hydrogen fuel. So not only will we have a zero-emission truck, but we want to ensure that we have a zero-emission fuel. Are we there yet? Are we going to have to make compromises on the way? Probably. But we're really trying to look at that entire offering, that whole supply chain. And again, the lease includes all of those aspects so that we can ensure for our customers that they're also getting that zero-emission solution. Secondly, you want to look at collaboration. I don't know if some of these slides, apologies, are a little bit off. I think we need to collaborate more deeply and more broadly than we ever have before. And some of that can be kind of scary. Within your company, break down the silos. Within your industry, work with your customers, work with your suppliers. You've heard a lot about talking to your customers, understanding what their needs are, and how do you play in solving those solutions with them. Work with your competitors. Figure out where do you need to compete and where can you collaborate in order to get us all to our goals. Society. I remember when we were at Walmart, kind of working with the government was a scary thing. And now we want to work with them hand in hand to ensure that, we're all kind of, again, progressing together. At Nikola, when you start thinking about, what can we do, we've been very deliberate about what do we do well and where do we need to find other people that have better expertise in those areas. And so you can see here we've partnered with some of the best companies in the world for this technology. And it's not only because they're bringing us expertise, they're also bringing us perspectives. You get that diverse perspective in order to come up with the best solutions. We're also working with our competitors. As many people know, on the electric side of trucks, and we are going to be offering all electric trucks here as well, so I'm not trying to bash the other side of this. But one of the concerns is that the charging stations and the plugs aren't going to be the same. So if you drive up to a charging station, you may or may not be able to actually hook into that charging station. So we're being proactive with this, working with what are now 2 of the largest competitors within the heavy-duty space, Hyundai and Toyota. And we're also working with the hydrogen providers, Nel, Shell, and Air Liquide, so that we can get ahead of those standards process. So whether you drive up to a Nikola station, whether you drive up to a Shell station, you know that you're going to be able to fuel that truck. So again, figure out where you can compete, where you need to compete, and understand where you can collaborate. Innovation. I love this quote. The light bulb did not come from the continuous improvement of candles. So we need to not only think outside the box, decide whether you even need a box. Maybe that's a square peg for a round hole. Really start thinking and innovating from the ground up. Make sure that you know where the business is going and be open to innovation. It can be scary. Again, I don't know, if I thought of myself as a jockey on a horse, for the last 10 years, I feel like I've just been, beating that horse to go faster. And then all of a sudden my dreams came true and now I'm like pulling the horse back, right? We're all getting inundated with all kinds of technology and all kinds of solutions. And there's a balance we need to play between having the technology fit our business and having our business adapt to the technology, the opportunities of the technology. So I think we heard earlier, be open to change, embrace change. It's not a bad thing. And make sure that you really drive that deep into your organization. This is probably the main reason I went to Nikola, was that over the 10 years I was trying to drive transportation and truck technology, there was a lot of evolution. There was a lot of trying to retrofit a diesel truck in order to do all of these things that we wanted to get to lower emissions and zero emissions. What Nikola has done is really gone with a clean sheet design. They haven't taken a diesel truck and retrofitted. They've built a truck to be most optimal as an electric truck, as a fuel cell truck. And in fact, initially, our CEO, Trevor, will tell you he didn't even want to talk to engineers that had been in the automotive space. He didn't want to have tunnel vision, based on what a truck used to do or used to look like. And so I believe we are really building trucks that will compete with a diesel truck, compete on performance, compete on cost, it'll compete on weight. And in fact, there's areas that will be better than a diesel. We're fully expecting that because it's an electric powertrain, far fewer moving parts, that it'll be less maintenance. When the trucks are going uphill, because they have the power at every wheel, those electric motors, the truck will be able to maintain that speed. They'll be able to more safely maneuver onto the highway because they have that extra torque. Now, a lot of the drivers will say, well, you're going to blow up all of my tires and wheels, so that in case there's anybody here in maintenance, there is torque management, so we aren't planning to just have those wheels blow out. The last thing I would say, and this goes back to why I kind of told you my story, make it personal. If I can channel Simon Sinek here, find your why. Find what motivates you, find what drives you, because I can guarantee you that when you feel this inside and you feel the reason, whether it's for sustainability or even just your business, understand your why, because you're going to come up with better solutions, you're going to come up with more innovative solutions, and you're going to be more persistent as you continue to go along, and you're going to be more open to change because you really want to see what those solutions are. Now, there's a lot of definitions of sustainability out there, but this is one of my favorites. And the reason is, I kind of have two reasons. One is it talks about a balance, right? We're not talking about this generation suffering in order for the next generation to just live high on the hog. It's about a balance. It's making sure that our next generations are able to continue to live a decent life. I'm sure many of you out there have children, have grandchildren, all of that. So it's not about us kind of pulling back on our quality of life. It's really about just making sure that we can kind of continue a good way of life for many years. The other part of the definition is it's not saying that we need to sort of stay this path, that everything needs to be the way it is. We're just not compromising the ability of future generations to do what they need to do. So again, you want to try and personalize it. You want to understand, is it your children and your grandchildren that motivates you? Do you have a friend maybe that has a lung issue like asthma? Do you care about waste? Are you a nature enthusiast? All of those things, just personalize it, and that's going to help you get to your goals. It's going to help your business get to its goals. It's going to help your customers get to its goals. So lastly, I just want to, again, thank you all for being here, and I want to invite you to join Nikola and transport the future to now. With that, I'm going to bring JP up, and we're going to have just a quick Q&A session. So thank you.
Thanks, Elizabeth, for that really inspiring talk. I really enjoyed, especially when you were talking about how people, companies, different kinds of organizations have to find their why. Now, I wondered if you could talk a little bit about sustainability as a kind of an emerging corporate value where you see that on the kind of adoption cycle.
For sure. I think it's been interesting to kind of see the ebb and flow of sustainability, and I'd be totally honest that it has ebbed and flowed with where the economy is, where the administration is, those types of things. But I think we're seeing, it was always kind of a nice to do, and now we're starting to see the benefits to the business and how it can make, as I said, make business sense. And sometimes that business sense is the dollars and cents. Sometimes it's even things like, a lot of the people coming into the organization, the millennials, if you will, this is a retention tool, right? They want to understand what the company is doing in regards to sustainability. They want to understand and be able to impact, the company, not just from a profit perspective, but from a dollar and cents. And they want to be proud of the company that they work with. Also, from a business sense, many people here, I'm sure, are being, they're working with their customers on helping their customers hit their goals. So I think it's starting to become very mainstream. It's starting to become something that we think about. I used to joke that, I'll know I've done my job properly when I work myself out of a job. I'm not sure that I'll get to retire on that thought, but we'll see.
Thanks. That's really interesting. Elizabeth, you do business development for Nikola. I wondered if you could talk a little bit about what the sales cycle looks like, the conversations you have with potential customers. I'm kind of curious, are you talking to sort of futurists in large organizations, like innovation people? Are you talking to people who are vaguely interested in environmentalism? Are you talking, or do they already know the business case and you're talking to CFOs and people like that?
I would say it's all of the above. The one thing that I've been super impressed with since I came to Nikola is with the companies is, they really want to understand this technology. A lot of them already understand where it could fit. They want to understand that it will also work in their operations. In the end, the truck is a tool for people to do their business. So it needs to be able to perform, but they can already see how this fits. And they all want to understand the technology, and they really want to dig in and make sure that they understand the bits and bytes, if you will, not just kind of this broad, vague picture. But there's been, a huge amount of interest for people that see the benefits of this, not only from a sustainability perspective, but also from a business perspective and, being able to lower their maintenance costs and all of the safety aspects and different things of the technology.
Do you talk to more shippers who are looking to sort of transform their private fleets into hydrogen fuel cell trucks, or are you talking more to enterprise carriers?
We've really had interest from both sides. And, in order for us to grow, I think we really need to work with all of the truck fleets out there, both large and small. The larger ones will probably be the anchor ones and the ones that help us kick it off because they have the volume in order to support the fuel infrastructure that we need to put up. Mm-hmm. But I've been surprised at how much interest we've gotten from owner-operators or drayage providers. There's just a huge amount of interest in wanting to transform their fleets. That's really interesting. You guys are sort of led with hydrogen fuel cell trucks. You said earlier that Nikola is also going to make battery electric trucks. Why hydrogen first? And can you talk a little bit about sort of comparing the use cases between hydrogen and battery electric? Sure. So, and again, we don't want to go out there saying one technology is necessarily better than another technology, but one technology is probably better in a particular duty cycle than another technology, which is why we're doing both. The reason we came out with hydrogen first is, we were seeing that there are some options coming out in the electric market, which is great for either shorter range, lanes, or maybe you have a return to base fleet and you have time to charge it overnight. So we really wanted to find a solution for the fleets that, either have longer lengths of haul, or maybe during a day have several shorter lengths of haul, but they need to go, a good distance during that day, or they're turning faster because it's a lot faster to fuel a hydrogen vehicle than it is an all-electric vehicle. So we're working on right now, it's a 15 to 20 minute fuel time for a truck. We're working to get that down to 10 minutes, which will allow the fleets to, quickly fuel and get on their way.
That 10 minutes, that sounds about like where it needs to be, right? Speaking of infrastructure, what's Nikola's plan for building out sort of refueling infrastructure? What does that network look like? What's the timeline?
Yeah, that's a big concern for everybody, and it's definitely a huge challenge. I would say number one, we've partnered with some of the best companies in the world in order to design these stations and to make sure that they can handle the volume and demand of the fleets that's out there. And we need to do this in a very structured and strategic way. So we're going to be working with our customers and really kind of grow with them as we look at where these stations will be. A while ago, we put out a map that had these 700 stations, and it was a little bit arbitrary. It was more just looking, where did fleets travel, what's the volume, and then looking at what the range of the trucks would be and how far apart those stations will be. So we do think about 700 stations over the next 10 years should be able to cover, the US and Canadian market. But will be how and when those stations get placed, how, when, where those stations get placed will be, working with the fleets. So whether it's sort of California and out, or maybe the two coasts in, we'll see how that happens. But our first stations will be in California, which I'm sure is no shock.
Right. That makes sense. So last night we actually last afternoon, we had a conversation at Champions. You were talking about your experience working for a very large Arkansas-based shipper. And you said some really interesting things about the way they think strategically about sustainability, about especially like how climate change and the kinds of impacts that are predicted by climate scientists might affect their business in coming decades. I just wondered if you could elaborate on that a little bit, because I found it so fascinating.
Sure. I did have a beer in front of me at the time, so I hope I remember everything I said. I'm just kidding. No, I think as we look forward, there's a lot of impacts that could really hurt the business. When you start thinking about the droughts in California, right? Like, how does that impact the food that's grown that Walmart and other retailers want to sell in their stores? What's the price of that food based on those impacts? There's things like, whenever there is a natural disaster, it disrupts sales, it disrupts transportation. There's a lot of costs with that. So I think a lot of the companies are really starting to see the strategic need to be thinking about sustainability and how does that impact? How does it impact resource availability? How does it impact their associates and their employees? So, in order for us to work on it, again, it needs to be kind of internalized to the company so that we understand that longer term. And it's hard because everybody's looking at the next quarter, right? So how do we get those longer term results? I think we've heard a couple of speakers here say that they've been able to really look long term. I think Gary Vee, that was one of his big things, right? He could look long term, and that's what he's doing. And so I think we need to get comfortable with that.
Thanks. Lastly, I just want to ask, you said Nikola's first refueling station will be in Southern California. It strikes me that the California Air Resources Board is highly supportive of zero-emission vehicles. But absent real support from the federal government, what kind of leadership role do you see for corporations in sustainability?
In regards to kind of like if the government wasn't there?
Well, like, yeah, I mean, like pulling out of the Paris Accord, but, you know, large organizations are still soldiering forward.
Absolutely. You know, I would say a lot of corporations have dug deeper. And, you know, maybe that's where we'll get the best solutions is when we see the advantage to ourselves and innovate.
Thanks so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.